The air in the village was thick with the scent of dust and smoke from evening cooking fires. Children's laughter echoed faintly from somewhere near the riverbank. It was an ordinary sunset until the fence splintered like matchsticks. Wooden beams snapped and flew through the air as a massive African elephant burst into the village. Her sides were streaked with blood, her ears flared wide, her trunk swinging frantically. Villagers scattered in every direction, some clutching their children, others frozen in place. She wasn't just any elephant. Her belly was swollen, round with the unmistakable weight of new life. The dust clung to her as she thundered down the dirt road, golden light catching on every desperate stride. No one knew why she had come or what she was running from, only that she was running toward them. And then from beyond the fence came a sound that made the oldest villager drop the pot in her hands. A roar, not the roar of another elephant. James Okoro, a local wildlife officer, had just finished checking snares along the river when he heard the chaos. He arrived to find half the village standing in the road, pointing toward the breach in the fence. The pregnant elephant, he recognized her instantly, was Nia, a matriarch from a nearby protected herd. Nia had been tagged and monitored for years. She was due to give birth within the month. For her to leave the safety of her territory and charge into a human settlement meant only one thing. Something had gone terribly wrong. Through the broken fence, James could see the tall grass swaying unnaturally. Then he spotted them. Two male lions moving low, their golden coats blending with the dying light. Lions rarely hunted full-grown elephants, but a pregnant female, slowed by the weight of her calf, was vulnerable. Nia's breathing was labored, each step heavier than the last. She was hurt. Deep gashes scored her hind leg, likely from a desperate swipe by one of the lions. But she wasn't just running from them. James knew the bush beyond the fence was thick with danger. Poachers had been spotted just days earlier. If the lions didn't kill her, human hunters might. The villagers began shouting, some waving their arms, trying to drive Nia back toward the open fields. But she refused, keeping her massive body angled toward the center of the village, where the scent of cooking fires and people was strongest. It wasn't random. She was seeking protection. James ran ahead, positioning himself between Nia and the panicked crowd. "Back! Give her space!" he yelled, his voice cutting through the noise. Behind him, the lions had stopped at the fence line, wary of the human presence. They paced, tails flicking, eyes fixed on their target. Nia turned slightly, her trunk curling toward James, releasing a low, rumbling sound, half warning, half plea. Then the sky cracked with another sound, not animal, but mechanical. From the west, an engine growled closer. Dust plumes rose above the trees. James's stomach knotted. Poacher's truck. James's eyes swept the scene. Nia's towering figure in the center of the road, the jagged gap in the wooden fence behind her, and beyond that, the wavering stalks of grass where the lions waited. The village had fallen into a tense silence, broken only by the crackle of a cooking fire and the restless shuffling of bare feet on dirt. The two male lions at the fence line weren't alone. Through the shifting blades of grass, James spotted two more shapes. Lionesses, low to the ground, inching forward with the precision of practiced hunters. Their golden eyes flickered between the wounded elephant and the scattering villagers, calculating angles, weighing the odds. Nia lifted her trunk high, testing the air. Her breathing was shallow now, each exhale carrying a faint, distressed rumble. The deep gash on her hind leg oozed dark streaks down her flank, staining the dry dust beneath her. She shifted her weight from one massive foot to the other, not to attack, but to shield her belly. James's chest tightened. She wasn't just running for herself. She was protecting the life inside her. A sudden movement to his right made him turn. Several young boys, no older than 12, had edged closer with sticks in hand, their faces set with stubborn bravery. James's voice rang out sharply. "Back! Now!" They hesitated, but the tone in his voice made them retreat toward the nearest hut. A lioness took that moment to move, slinking closer, her body so low that her belly brushed the dirt. The lions weren't going to cross the fence yet, not while so many humans stood near. But if Nia took even a few steps in the wrong direction, she'd be open. James knew he had to keep her where she was. He stepped slowly toward her, speaking in a low, steady tone. "You're safe here. Stay." Her trunk swung toward him, and for a moment her eyes locked with his. They were not the wild, untouchable eyes of an untamed giant. They were pleading, raw with exhaustion. Then the air shifted. A low, mechanical growl rolled across the village from the west. James turned toward the sound, his stomach sinking. The plume of dust on the horizon was moving fast, the glint of metal catching the last rays of the sun. Even from here, he could make out the silhouette of a battered pickup truck, exactly the kind used by poachers in the area. The villagers heard it too. Some began murmuring, others moved instinctively to gather their children. The lions reacted differently. The males froze, ears pricked toward the approaching noise. The lionesses crouched even lower, torn between the potential threat of the truck and the wounded prize standing just meters away. James's mind raced. The lions were bad enough, but if the poachers reached Nia in her current state, she would be trapped, caught between human predators and their four-legged counterparts. He turned to the villagers. "We need to block the road." Blank stares met his words for a moment, until an older man stepped forward, nodding. Within seconds, people were running in all directions, grabbing wooden poles, fishing nets, even woven mats, to create a barrier. Nia stayed where she was, watching the frantic human activity with her ears slightly raised. Her breathing was uneven, her weight still shifting to keep her unborn calf protected. Beyond the fence, the lions paced, restless. They knew something was coming, something they too didn't trust, and the truck was getting closer. The rumble of the truck grew deeper, reverberating off the mud walls of the huts. James could now see the shape of two men in the cab, their silhouettes rigid, eyes fixed on the open path into the village. A rifle barrel jutted from the passenger side window, glinting in the last light of day. The villagers worked in frantic unison, slamming poles into the dirt to form a rough barricade. Women dragged woven mats across the road, anchoring them with stones, while a group of men tipped over an old cart to block the center. The barrier wasn't impenetrable, but it was a message. You will not pass easily. Nia stood at the center of it all, her colossal frame casting a shadow over the road. The golden sunset painted her hide in rich, warm tones, but the blood on her hind leg was stark against the light. She swayed slightly, her ears twitching toward every new sound. The lion's low growls behind her, the hurried shouts of the villagers, the mechanical growl of the approaching truck. James stepped toward her again, careful, deliberate. "Stay here, girl. You're safe here," he murmured. But safety was a fragile illusion. From beyond the fence, one of the lions roared, a deep, guttural sound that made the hairs on James's arms stand on end. The males had retreated further into the grass when the truck's noise first reached them, but now, emboldened by the chaos, they crept closer again. Two golden heads appeared above the tall grass, eyes locked on Nia's exposed flank. James's pulse spiked. This was the worst possible scenario. Predators closing in from one side, human hunters from the other. The truck slowed as it neared the edge of the village. Dust swirled in its wake, wrapping the vehicle in a hazy halo. The passenger leaned out of the window, scanning the scene, his gaze lingering on the elephant, then darting toward the lions, then back again. The lions froze at the sight of the truck, but they didn't run. Predators knew predators. The driver cut the engine. Silence fell heavy across the village, broken only by the thump of Nia's massive heart in James's ears. Then a voice called out from the truck, low, taunting, almost casual. "She's worth more than all your cattle combined." The words sent a ripple of unease through the gathered crowd. A few villagers tightened their grip on poles and sticks. Others glanced nervously at James. He took a step forward, placing himself directly between the truck and Nia. "You're not taking her," he said, his voice steady but loud enough to carry. The man in the passenger seat smiled faintly, then reached for something on the dashboard. Behind James, Nia shifted again, this time not from fear but from decision. Her trunk curled upward, her ears spread wide, and a deep, resonant rumble rolled out of her chest. The lion stepped back. The men in the truck didn't. The man in the passenger seat lowered his hand to the dashboard, fingers brushing the butt of a rifle. James's eyes locked on the motion instantly. If he reached for it fully, there would be no time to negotiate, only to react. The driver revved the engine once, a short, aggressive growl meant to rattle the villagers. It didn't work, not this time. From the line of huts, more people emerged. Older men with long wooden spears, young women clutching iron cooking rods still warm from the fire. They didn't shout or wave them wildly. Instead, they stood shoulder to shoulder in the dusty road, facing the truck in a silent, unmoving wall. James felt the shift in the air. This wasn't just about protecting an elephant anymore. It was about protecting one of their own. Nia seemed to sense it too. Her head lowered slightly, trunk curling inward as if to center herself. She took a slow step forward, positioning her massive body between the truck and the heart of the village. The fading light caught in her eyes, and for the first time since she'd crashed through the fence, James saw something more than fear there. Resolve. From beyond the broken fence, the lions paced, restless. They didn't dare approach now with so many humans gathered, but their frustration was clear in every swish of their tails. One male gave a final deep growl before slipping back into the grass, the other following close behind. The poachers exchanged a look. The rifle in the passenger's lap didn't rise, but his scowl deepened. "You can't keep her forever," he muttered, loud enough for James to hear. "No," James replied, "but we can keep her safe tonight." The driver spat into the dirt, then shifted the truck into reverse. The grinding gears echoed in the still air as the vehicle began to back away. A few villagers took cautious steps forward, watching until the truck disappeared into the line of thorn trees that bordered the road. But the tension didn't dissolve completely. The danger was still out there, waiting. Nia exhaled a long, deep breath. It sounded almost like relief. She lifted her trunk once, brushing it lightly against the air in front of James, then turned slowly toward the narrow path that led back toward the reserve. James didn't need to push or guide her. She knew where home was. The villagers stepped aside to let her pass, the warm light of the sunset casting long shadows behind her. Each step she took left an impression in the dusty road, marks that would be gone by morning, but never forgotten by the people who saw them. James followed her until the path dipped out of sight, the sounds of the village returning one by one. The chatter of voices, the clink of cooking pots, the faint laughter of children now safe again. The fading sun dipped lower, bathing the entire village in molten gold. Nia moved slowly now, each step deliberate, her great weight shifting carefully to protect the life inside her. The villagers trailed at a respectful distance, their makeshift weapons still in hand. Not out of aggression, but out of readiness. James stayed just behind her left shoulder, scanning the horizon for any sign of a returning threat. The lions were gone for now, swallowed by the grasslands. The poachers had retreated, but the dust trail from their truck was still faintly visible on the western road. He knew men like that didn't simply give up. They waited for shadows, for sleep, for an opening. A sudden sound from behind made his heart jolt, a hollow thunk of wood against earth. One of the fence posts from the earlier breach had collapsed fully, falling inward toward the road. The open gap now yawned wide enough for any predator to enter. James caught the eye of two young men in the crowd. "Seal it before dark," he ordered. They nodded and ran to retrieve more timber. The rest of the villagers shifted their focus back to Nia, keeping their formation around her. The smell of the evening fires drifted on the breeze, mingling with the musky scent of the elephant. Every so often, she'd lift her trunk to test the air, pausing just long enough to listen before continuing forward. The muscles in her shoulders rolled like living hills beneath her hide. They reached the edge of the village, where the dirt road narrowed into a worn animal path leading toward the reserve. The light was dimmer here, filtered through acacia branches, and the sounds of the village began to fade. James felt the change in her posture before he saw it. Nia's head rose slightly higher, her stride lengthening, the tension in her frame easing bit by bit. The path ahead smelled of familiar soil, familiar water. But behind them on the far edge of the open plain, a shape lingered. The truck. It hadn't gone far. Its engine was off, but the faint glint of metal in the last light confirmed it was still there, watching. James stopped walking, turning to face it. The villagers followed his gaze, and a ripple of low murmurs passed through the group. One older woman spat into the dirt, muttering something in her native tongue that James didn't need translated. Her meaning was clear. For several long seconds, the truck didn't move. Then finally, it reversed into the tree line, vanishing into the growing darkness. James let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had bought her more time, maybe enough to see her home safely. He looked ahead again. The golden light had almost vanished now, replaced by the deep amber of approaching night. Nia kept moving, her massive silhouette framed by the dying glow of the horizon, each step carrying her further from danger and closer to safety. The path narrowed further, winding between tall stands of elephant grass that brushed against Nia's flanks as she passed. The villagers had begun to fall back, letting James and two younger men walk closer to her now that they were nearing the outer boundary of the reserve. The sounds of the village were gone entirely, replaced by the quiet chorus of crickets and the distant call of a nightjar. Nia's pace slowed again. Her head swayed gently from side to side, ears flicking at unseen insects. The deep wound on her hind leg glistened faintly in the last light, but she pushed forward, steady and determined. James scanned the shadows on both sides of the path. The lions would be unlikely to follow this far, but poachers were another matter. The earlier sight of the truck lingering at the edge of the plain stuck in his mind like a thorn. "Almost there, girl," he murmured, keeping his voice low. Ahead, the first outline of the reserve's perimeter fence came into view, a tall, electrified barrier designed to keep out predators and human threats alike. Just beyond it, the dark shapes of acacia trees marked the edge of safe territory. One of the young men jogged ahead to the gate, waving toward the small ranger outpost stationed there. A flashlight beam swept across the path, catching Nia's silhouette in a warm glow. But behind them, the faint crunch of tires on dry earth made James's stomach tighten. He turned sharply. Through a gap in the grass, the poacher's truck was moving again, slower this time, its lights off, coasting along a parallel track. "They're still following," James said under his breath. The younger man at his side gripped his spear tighter. "If they get too close before the gate closes—" "They won't," James cut in. His voice was sharper now, his steps quickening to match Nia's. As if sensing the urgency, the elephant picked up her pace. Her ears flared once, catching the low hum of the fence ahead, and she released a low, resonant rumble. The sound carried through the grass like a warning, both to those behind her and to those waiting ahead. The gate was fully open now, rangers stepping out with rifles slung across their shoulders. They waved urgently for James to bring her through. The truck behind them slowed to a stop at the edge of the open plain, the men inside clearly weighing their next move. From this distance, the rifles in the rangers' hands were unmistakable. After a long moment, the vehicle turned, disappearing back toward the west. James didn't relax until he heard the gate clang shut behind them. Nia stood just inside the perimeter, sides heaving, her great head lowering slightly as if the weight on her shoulders had finally eased. She reached her trunk toward the nearest acacia branch, pulling a few tender leaves into her mouth. The small, slow motion felt like a declaration. She was safe enough to eat again. James exhaled hard, the tension draining from his chest. They had made it. Inside the reserve's boundary, the air felt different, quieter, heavier with the scent of acacia and wild sage. The hum of the electric fence was a faint reassurance in the background, a line of invisible safety between Nia and the world that had driven her here. But James didn't let himself relax completely. He'd been in this line of work long enough to know that danger didn't always respect boundaries. Two rangers approached slowly, their movements measured so as not to spook her. One carried a medical kit, the other, a long pole tipped with a small torch for examining wounds in low light. Nia's eyes followed them, wary but not hostile. She took a half step backward, her hind leg favoring the injured side. The fresh scent of her blood still hung faint in the air. A beacon for predators, even if the lions couldn't reach her here. "Let's clean it before infection sets in," one ranger murmured to James. They worked as the sun's last edge sank below the horizon, the sky fading from gold to a deep purple. James stayed close to her head, speaking softly in a steady rhythm. She didn't understand the words, but the tone seemed to hold her still. Her trunk brushed his arm once, a slow, almost deliberate touch. The villagers who had followed stood just outside the gate, watching in silence. The earlier fear in their eyes had shifted into something else. Respect, maybe even pride. They had faced down lions and poachers together, and the great elephant still stood because of it. When the rangers finished cleaning and dressing the wound, Nia shifted her weight and let out a long, low breath. The tension in her shoulders eased. She turned her head toward the darker part of the reserve, where the moonlight was already touching the grass. Somewhere out there, in the quiet heart of the protected land, was safety, and space enough for her to give birth in peace. James stepped back, giving her room. She hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to linger. Then, without sound, she began walking deeper into the reserve, her silhouette melting into the shadows between the trees. The villagers slowly drifted back toward the road, their voices low, the night settling in around them. James stayed at the gate until she was gone from sight. Only then did he turn toward the small ranger hut, exhaustion finally catching up to him. He knew this night would stay with him forever, not just because of the danger, but because of the way an entire community had stood between one mother and the threats that hunted her. The gate buzzed faintly behind James as the rangers locked it for the night, but his eyes stayed fixed on the darkened path Nia had taken. Beyond the first line of trees, the reserve opened into a vast plain under a silvering sky. Even in the low light, he could just make out the rhythmic sway of her massive form as she moved deeper in, step by deliberate step. One of the rangers, Kofi, walked up beside him. "She knows where she's going," he said quietly. "There's a grove near the east waterhole where the herd sometimes calves. Safe ground." James nodded, but his shoulders stayed tense. "The poachers, they won't just forget about her." Kofi's jaw tightened. "They might circle back in a few days, but after tonight, they'll know this village and this reserve won't give her up easily." The last of the villagers lingered outside the fence, murmuring in low voices, the glow from their cooking fires just visible down the slope. The air carried a different weight now, less panic, more solidarity. What had started as a terrifying intrusion had become something else entirely, a line drawn between them and those who would harm her. From somewhere deep inside the reserve, a distant trumpet rolled through the night air, not loud but clear enough to reach them. James's head turned toward the sound instantly. Nia's voice. It wasn't the panicked bellow from earlier. This was slower, almost melodic, and it echoed for several seconds before fading into the silence. "She's letting them know she's here," Kofi said, "and maybe that she's safe." James let the sound settle in his chest. For the first time since the fence had splintered, he felt his breathing slow. But he knew the night wasn't over. The rangers would keep watch in shifts, the villagers would double-check their fences, and he would stay until dawn, just to be sure nothing came back for her. He didn't say it out loud, but the truth was simple. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was theirs. The crickets grew louder, the fires in the village dimmer, and the moon rose higher over the acacia trees. Nia's shadow had long since vanished from view, but James could still picture her, moving steadily toward the grove, toward the place where the air was calm and the grass was high enough to cradle new life. And somewhere in the darkness, the unseen calf she carried was still alive, because she had made it this far. The reserve settled into its nighttime rhythm, but James remained on edge. He stood with Kofi and another ranger, Musa, at the small lookout platform just inside the fence. From there, the moonlit expanse of the first grazing field stretched out before them, dissolving into the dark shapes of trees further in. Every so often, a shadow would shift in the distance, making James's chest tighten, only to resolve into a harmless antelope or a wandering warthog. Still, his mind replayed the events of the day in vivid flashes. The splintering of the fence, the golden blur of lions in the grass, the dust trailing behind the poacher's truck. "She'll head for water first," Musa murmured, scanning the open ground. "Pregnant females always do before resting. Gives them strength." James nodded but kept silent. He was listening, not just to the night sounds, but for that low, distinct trumpet they'd heard earlier. It hadn't come again, and that absence made the dark feel heavier. Down by the village road, lanterns flickered as the last of the villagers returned to their huts. Even in the fading light, James could see how the breach in the fence was now patched with fresh timber and bound tight with rope. It wouldn't stop a determined predator, but it sent a message. There would be resistance next time. Kofi passed him a battered pair of field binoculars. "Here," Check near the East Grove. James raised them, focusing past the acacia silhouettes until he spotted movement. A faint, slow swaying, the pale gleam of tusks catching stray moonlight. Nia. She was still moving, her bulk barely visible above the grass, heading toward the grove just as Kofi predicted. But something else moved behind her, two small, low shapes slipping between the shadows. James's stomach tightened. "Hyenas," he said under his breath. The Rangers exchanged a look. "They won't risk much," Musa said. "Not with her size. But if she lies down, they might try," James finished for him. They watched as Nia paused at the edge of the grove, lifting her trunk high. The hyenas halted too, keeping their distance. One barked, a sharp, mocking sound that carried through the still air. James could see Nia's posture change. Her head lowered, her ears flaring just slightly. She let out a short, deep rumble, the kind that vibrated more than it echoed. The hyenas froze, then began to circle wider, eventually fading into the tall grass. Only when they were gone did she step into the grove. James lowered the binoculars and let out a slow breath. "She made it there," Kofi smiled faintly. "Then she'll be all right." But James wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. He leaned against the railing, eyes still on the moonlit trees where she'd vanished. Somewhere out there, she was settling into a place where she could finally rest. And maybe, if the night stayed quiet, tomorrow would bring more than just survival. The moon climbed higher, draping the reserve in a cool silver glow. From the lookout, James could just make out the faint rustle of leaves where Nia had disappeared into the grove. Every now and then, a branch shifted, and the silhouette of her great head would appear briefly against the starlit sky before fading again into the shadows. Kofi and Musa rotated their watch, one staying on the platform while the other made slow circuits along the inside of the fence. James refused to leave, his gaze fixed on the grove as though sheer will could keep her safe. The night around them was alive but subdued. The distant whoop of a hyena far to the south, the occasional flap of a nightbird's wings overhead, the steady hum of insects filling every quiet moment. It was the soundscape of the savannah at rest, but James couldn't shake the tension in his muscles. His mind wandered to the calf she carried. How far along was she? Could the stress of the day force an early birth? He had seen it happen before, an animal brought to the brink, only for instinct to demand that life push forward regardless of the danger. A faint rumble carried from the grove, low and rhythmic. It wasn't the alarm trumpet of a threatened elephant, but the softer, almost conversational sound they made among family. It gave James hope. Perhaps the rest of her herd, or at least a few companions, had found her already. Musa returned from his patrol carrying a battered lantern. "Fence line is clear. No tracks except the ones we know." "Poachers?" James asked without looking away from the grove. "Nothing. If they're still out there, they're keeping their distance." That was some comfort, but not enough to let his guard drop. He'd seen too many nights turn without warning. Hours slipped by in slow fragments. The fire in the village below burned low until only glowing embers marked its center. The air grew cooler, the breeze shifting to carry the scent of fresh grass from the grove. Then, movement. Not the slow swaying of leaves, but the deliberate shift of a massive body stepping out from the trees. Nia emerged into the open moonlight, her sides moving with deep, steady breaths. She paused at the edge of the clearing, trunk raised high, tasting the air. Her posture was calm now, her weight balanced evenly on all 4 feet. Whatever had haunted her earlier that day was far behind her. For now. James exhaled slowly. She was safe for the night. But as he watched her stand beneath the acacias, bathed in pale light, he knew the real challenge lay ahead. She still had to carry new life into this dangerous world. And until that happened, her fight, and theirs, wasn't over. 3 weeks later, James was back at the reserve's southern outpost, sorting through photographs from recent patrols, when Kofi appeared in the doorway. His face carried the kind of quiet smile that didn't need words. "She did it," Kofi said simply. James stood so quickly that his chair scraped the floor. "Where?" "The East Grove." They walked together along the familiar dirt path, the early morning light spilling over the savannah in gentle gold. The air was cool and fresh, and as they neared the grove, James caught the faintest sound, a higher-pitched trumpet, clumsy and short, like a voice still learning how to speak. There, in a small clearing, surrounded by the dappled shade of acacias, stood Nia. Her massive frame was thinner now, her movements slower but sure, and pressed against her side, trunk curling uncertainly in the air, was a newborn calf. Its skin was still the soft, pinkish gray of new life, ears too large for its head, eyes wide with unfiltered curiosity. Nia watched them approach but didn't retreat. Instead, she took one step forward, placing herself partly in front of the calf, a mother's instinct still sharp. Her trunk lifted toward James, brushing the air between them. James didn't move closer. He simply met her gaze, nodding once. "You made it home," he murmured. The calf shifted, pressing more firmly into its mother's side. Nia rumbled softly, and the sound seemed to settle over the grove like a blessing. Kofi lifted his camera, capturing the moment, but James didn't reach for his. Some things were better carried in memory than on film. They stood there for a long while until the sun climbed higher and the shadows shrank. Finally, as they turned to leave, Kofi pressed a small print into James's hand, a photo taken just minutes earlier. On the back, in Kofi's steady handwriting, were 3 words: "She made it home." James slipped the photograph into his pocket, knowing it would stay there for a long time. Because in the wild, survival was never promised. But on rare days, days like this, it was earned. If this story touched your heart, share it so more people can see the strength and resilience of these incredible animals. Subscribe for more powerful wildlife rescue stories from the heart of the savannah.